Hi, I'm here at historic George Washington's Mount Vernon. I've got here with me Justin Filipowski, and he's got some great information on tobacco. We talked about a little bit of tobacco in the past. I know there's a lot of interest in tobacco, and tobacco is so massively important for this area and for really the entire United States. This whole area, this 18th century time period, even 17th century time period, is such an important part of the founding of our country. I wanted to get somebody in here that could help me kind of tease out some of these things all about tobacco. You're going to tell me everything about tobacco, right?
We'll see.
Okay. Tell me about the importance of tobacco, especially this area, this kind of time period, 18th century.
Okay. Tobacco here is going to have a number of different roles that it's playing. Early in the 18th century, we are going to see that people are getting extraordinarily wealthy off of the crop, and like many things, looking into the 19th century, when you have the gold rush, people are flocking to crops like tobacco, and of course, as is the case, you flood the market, and then prices start to drop, and we see that it is ultimately going to be something that may cause you to go bankrupt. And we see here at Mount Vernon, Washington never gets to that state. He's very aware of how the markets are moving, and in the 1760s he is going to transition with many other leading agriculturalists of that time period to another crop, and here it's going to be wheat. But
so what makes tobacco so good for this area and not another area? Maybe
it's really kind of the perfect area for humidity and heat, and both of those things, along with the fertile soil that was here early on, just was the perfect region for growth. And we'll see that also is going to come to an end as tobacco is going to be really rough on the soil, and you're going to see clear cutting and people moving, and you're constantly going to need to find new land that's going to be rich for the crop.
Okay, so tobacco, though, even in this late 18th century time period, Revolutionary War, all the way up into 1800, still pretty important for what's happening here.
Yeah, we see a lot of social implications with being a tobacco planter. So if you're Washington and you grow up not necessarily the wealthiest guy, it's going to kind of give you a gateway into that upper echelon of society. And you want to hold on to that type of club as long as you can. So even in the 1790s, we see Washington still trying to find some way to add tobacco to the crop. Don't really see him talking much about the profit, but he's always looking at adding more, even upwards of about 70,000 plants in 1799.
So he's doing this possibly, because we don't know for sure.
Exactly.
But possibly for the social status.
It's very likely that at least in the early years, that is why he's holding on as long as he does.
And there's some stigma to not being able to be good at producing tobacco?
Yes, there is. And as you can see in other areas of the marketplace, you like to kind of call out your competitors, and you like to brag about how good things are. We see Washington complaining about how bad his crop is, and then months later he's talking about it being as good as any you're going to find on the continent, and bad-mouthing some of the farmers just down the way. But then he's also going to those same farmers to figure out, like, how can we get better. It's a unique side of the economy that we don't really focus on that often. When we think of the 18th century, we think all of these men are the most proper that you're going to get, and there's quite a bit of mudslinging.
Tell me a little bit about the process, the growing of tobacco.
Okay, depending on what source you're looking at from the 18th century, you're going to see that seeds are going to be collected at the end of the last year's harvest, and they're hopefully going into the ground as soon after Christmas as possible, which today we think is very unusual because it's so cold. But we want to get it in the ground. We're going to start a bed that will be covered with manure. We're going to have lots of soil, and you're going to sometimes use straw. Other references are going to tell you to use sticks and
to protect those
those plants. Kind of keep it warm and ready to start up in the early spring.
Maybe keep animals away from it?
And keep animals away as well, absolutely. We see that some of the first transplants are going to happen in March or April, which is also very early by today's standards.
So early on you have these beds where you're packing in lots and lots of little plants, then they have to distribute these plants.
So as soon as the plants start making their way through, you're going to want to do a lot of selection on what you're going to thin. So you're going to try and give yourself plenty of space.
Right.
And the rule of thumb is whatever you're hoping to gather in terms of, let's say you have 70,000 plants, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to want about 700,000 seeds going into the ground. So it's about a 10-to-1 ratio of what you can expect.
Okay.
And when that does start to break through, you thin, and when it gets to about the size of about $1, a silver dollar.
The leaves or
when
stem?
you start seeing the leaves,
okay.
About the size of a silver dollar, we're ready to then take that out and we're going to put it into some mounds.
Okay.
And this is also where you're going to see it's somewhere between 3 and 4 feet in between each mound. Going
it's a lot of room.
A lot of room going both vertical and horizontal on those axes. So you have a huge field of just these mounds that had been prepared, waiting for these things to get to the right size. And then it's wait till it's a wet day, take it out of the ground and put it right back in.
Kill them, kill their roots or whatever.
You're going to make sure it's a smooth transition. And then it's just kind of a waiting game. You're going to hope that you're getting the rain that you need. You're going to weed as frequently as you can. You're going to keep building up those mounds as that crop gets larger.
Are you tending the plant, maybe?
You're not at the first month or so, you're really not focused on it. But once you start getting somewhere around 3 feet, you're going to want to make sure your leaves aren't touching the ground. You're going to want to start pulling off leaves that are damaged. And we're hoping to collect somewhere between about 8 and 12 leaves from one plant. And that's it.
How big are they? How big is a leaf?
Man, a leaf can get about as big as your torso in terms of how wide it is.
Really big.
Yeah, it can. It's quite large, and that's all going to depend on how well you're looking at those leaves. Because the more you've got on there, the smaller they're going to be. Those nutrients are just going to be spread
so
throughout.
You might strip some off.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Once it gets to about 3 feet, you really focus on, okay, this is a good quality leaf. We're going to make sure that we keep an eye on it. And if you see something known as a sucker, which is basically another plant starting to shoot out, you're going to pull that out. You're going to do the same thing at the root. So
nip it in the bud.
Nip it in the bud. Yeah, you got it. And over the course of the next several months, you're going to do this process daily. You may not be able to get all 4,000 plus in 1 acre in a day, but you're going to make sure you do that as quickly as possible. Maybe 1,000, 2,000 a day.
Yeah. Very labor-intensive process.
Very labor-intensive.
It's continuous work, continuous care,
Yeah.
all the way from the start
Absolutely.
of the process to, well, it probably just keeps on going, doesn't it?
Yes, and we'll eventually get to a point where we're going to select some plants that have some good leaves, and we'll let those go to flower, and that's going to be the source of our seeds for the following year.
Hopefully the very best. We're going to
Hopefully
keep the very
best.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they're real particular on genetics.
So now what are we going to do with our plant at that point?
When we get to the point where the leaves start to get pretty sticky, and then they start to mottle and have several colors, you have some nice yellows with the green. Yeah, we're going to then cut it right at the base. We'll eventually take a stake and put it right through the bottom, and we're going to hang them on some stakes that are about 4 feet long, and hopefully we've got them no more than probably 3/4 of an inch in one direction and about an inch to maybe 2 in the other. So you're looking at 3/4 by 1.5 inches by 4 feet.
So we're racking this up so we can dry it out?
Yes, yeah, we'll cut it. We can let it typically sit for a day before we actually start staking it, because that'll let it
self-do its thing. Yeah.
It'll actually make it where it's really pliable. Because if you take it and start,
wilts, yeah.
yes, it'll wilt. If you do it too soon, there's a chance it's going to split right through the stalk.
Gotcha.
So a lot of that work will take place.
And then we have this does drying process is
it's
important too?
It's going to be
the work hasn't stopped yet.
Right, it hasn't stopped. We're looking at now somewhere starting in March and April with the transplanting. We're looking at harvesting in September.
Okay.
Maybe October if we have a really late planting, and then that'll go into a barn where these sticks with the tobacco plants on them are hanging, and hopefully 5 or 6 weeks we've got a crop that has this really strong smell, and some are going to tell you can take that leaf off and chew it, and you're going to be able to tell how good the crop is. Don't want to ever try that to evaluate the quality of your crop, but at that point you'll be able to then start stripping the leaves, taking the stem out of the center, and then packing those into a barrel. And eventually you'll have in a process known as prizing, where you'll actually have a press to make sure you get as much of that into a hogshead.
Right. So you're squeezing it for probably a couple different reasons, right?
Yeah, you want to get in as much as possible. You want to make sure that you're going to retain some moisture so it does not get to a point where it's very brittle. Right. And at this point, it's really the make or break, because you're worried, is it going to get too moist while it's hanging, and we're going to get mold? Is it going to get too brittle, and now I'm not going to be able to do anything
turn into
with
powder,
it? Yeah, so it's something that you have the least amount of control during the entire process, or at least that would be my personal opinion.
But still a massive amount of talent you have to know.
Yes.
It's like, do I let this go? Do we prize it now?
Yes.
If I let it go too long? So there's all these judgment calls.
Yes.
That's more of that, am I good at my job? Or
Absolutely. And unfortunately in the 18th century, we don't have any guide telling us exactly what it should look like. Everyone is holding those secrets
trade
themselves.
secrets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Thankfully we do have some documentation in 1800 from a gentleman named William Tatum, who kind of gives us a glimpse as an outsider of what's happening, but he still doesn't reveal any true path to success.
The good stuff he keeps back.
Yes.
So it's in kegs. Obviously it's still a sort of a bulk process.
Right.
How does it get to market at this point?
So for Washington, it would go one of two ways. It's going to go either up the Potomac to Alexandria, where Washington is going to have a warehouse that will be doing his sales for him. So he's got an agent here, and he's also got an agent overseas in England. And we see a number of different markets. There are about a dozen markets in England at the time. We know Bristol is mentioned, and London are two that are very key focuses for Washington, specifically in the 1760s. Those are some of those that are mentioned. And we know that all of those hogsheads aren't even going to make it to market sometimes because of the damages to ships. I think Washington lost about 11 hogsheads in one shipping incident.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea of getting as much as they can in the barrel, because they weren't shipping it by weight, they were shipping it by the number of barrels you had. So you got as much in as you could get it.
Yeah, you're getting about 1,000 pounds, give or take a little bit.
That's a big, big barrel.
And thankfully here at Mount Vernon, we have great records where Washington will show you 3 different barrels, the number of those barrels and how much each barrel weighed, and then how much it weighed with the tobacco in it. So you've got the tare weights.
Really interesting.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource.
What are these factors when they sell it? How do they break it up and sell it to the public?
You're going to see when it's being sold at auction. Sometimes it's based on color, based on smell. That's something that is not as written about as frequently as I personally would like. But those things are spoken of. Also the feel, you want to. It's supposed to be fairly leathery. Is one way that it is described.
Tobacco leathery. What are they turning it into and selling it to the regular public though?
We see that. Pipe tobacco is going to be very common, and we're going to see snuff is going to be extremely common. More so here at Mount Vernon for the family members, because Martha is a big fan of snuff. But those are the two that are going to be pretty much commonplace if you were to go to a tavern somewhere. You could buy a pre-filled pipe and smoke it right then and there.
What is the process of taking that tobacco and turning it into a snuff? Is it like a powder? What do they do with it?
It's going to be a finely ground tobacco. So it's it's going to be very close to a powder, but you still want to have some source of flavor in there at that time. I believe it is Gilbert Stewart that you can still, if you have the opportunity to go to Rhode Island, there is a small little tobacco mill that is present for those who are interested in that type of thing.
Sure.
But it's almost like a large mortar and pestle where you're basically breaking it down
into a powder,
into a powder-like state. And a lot of these are actually going to be flavored. We sometimes think that tobacco in the 18th century, it must have been really hard and rough. And for those who are going to harvest their own and smoke it, that's probably what they're doing. They're going to take that, put it into twist or whatever method they want to consume it, and there's not going to be much to it. But for someone like a Washington, you're going to have it flavored with a number of different things, with rums and different bergamot, and you go down the list of all of the things you find your tea flavored with. Your tobacco is going to be pretty close to it.
Was George Washington a big pipe smoker?
He was not.
He wasn't.
No, I've never seen in his letters Washington. It doesn't mean it's not there, but him smoking or consuming tobacco. I've only heard of one reference.
So Justin, tell me a little bit about the actual tobacco program you've got going on here and now at Mount Vernon.
Not a problem. So what we're working with right now is a small plot that focuses our attention on about 100 to 125 tobacco plants. And we want to make the idea of growing in the 18th century fairly real for people. So we find that most visitors, this is their first and maybe only interaction with the crop visually, but we want to allow them, if they're interested, to get into the fields and help us pick off the nasty worms or sucker
Sounds like
some of the unwanted leaves, and that's kind of what we offer throughout the year while it's in the field. Now we're looking at ways that we can add to our tobacco program here, and one of those is a special event that we do every fall, which is a whiskey and cigar dinner. And all those cigars are in the 18th century, it's not that often, but we do want people to have the opportunity to smoke it. And we did that last September. So if anyone is interested, you could gladly come to Mount Vernon.
So check out that in September.
Yeah, in September, and you can smoke some of the tobacco grown right here. And if someone's local, they can come and help care for it on a regular basis.
That sounds very, very interesting. Well, thank you for your amazing warehouse of information about tobacco. And I know it's probably an ongoing thing with you. You're always researching more, looking for a little bit more, understanding the process and understanding George Washington's work with that, as well as whatever else is happening. And because it is just not studying that is like not studying half of what's going on in this area, or more than what's going on. So it is an amazing part of what's the important part of just plain 18th century living, much less in this area. Justin, thank you. Thank you for your great information. And hey, thank you for all your amazing questions, all your wonderful comments that we get on the YouTube channel. I know there's been a lot of interest about tobacco, and I'm just so happy to be able to, bring this episode to you today because it really kind of goes in depth. We're just so happy to connect with Justin here so we can get a little bit more of that information. We continue to tease out all these just things that we just don't quite understand or don't have any idea that are going on in the 18th century. Thank you so much for all your support and everything you do. And make sure if you're in this area, come to Mount Vernon, come to George Washington's Mount Vernon, check out this tobacco program. Thank you so much.